Welcome to the Engaged Parish podcast. Today we will be speaking with Father Nicholas Desimone about ways parishes can navigate the challenges of merging and closing churches. Father Nick has been a priest in the Diocese of Worcester for nearly 15 years. He graduated Holy Cross and attended Mount St. Mary Seminary and the Pontifical North American College in Rome. He is the pastor at St. Mary's Parish in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, and is also on the committee for pastoral planning and the chair of evangelization in the Diocese of Worcester, amongst many other titles. He is a very busy man. During our discussion today, Father Nick will be pulling insights and wisdom from his own experience as he recently went through this process just a few years ago. Father Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So, Father Nick, before we dive in, could you tell us a little bit more about your priesthood and your path to actually becoming pastor at St. Mary's?
Sure. I was ordained for the Diocese of Worcester in 2010. And immediately after being ordained, I returned to Rome and completed additional graduate studies. And then spent 2 wonderful years at a parish in Charlton, Massachusetts, St. Joe's. Really just loved that experience, did a lot of work in youth ministry at that particular time. And after 2 years at St. Joe's in Charlton, I got the phone call that they needed to send me to Uxbridge as the pastor. So I was, I faked it for a while, trying to be the kind of pastor that I wanted to be, but not letting on that I had no idea what I was doing in the beginning. But it's been a tremendous experience here in Uxbridge. I've been here since 2013, and every day is exciting and great, and I work with some of the most amazing people and just a spectacular parish. So I've been really blessed throughout my priesthood.
Excellent. And as we set the stage for this conversation today, you've coined this phrase, parish renewal. I love it. At the end of the day, it's parish merging, closing. Dioceses across the country are experiencing this. There's so many different names, but I liked the name you coined, parish renewal. Could you walk us through maybe the choice of using the word parish renewal, the time frame, and generally what took place? Like what was the impetus for this, and what did that process look like?
Sure. Yeah. I think the phrase came later. I think the situation emerged first, and then the phrasing came later. The bishop contacted me in 2021 and asked if I would become administrator at 2 neighboring parishes with the thought of uniting them into a single parish, perhaps. Actually, I should backtrack a little bit. Nothing had been predetermined or decided at that point, but what we knew was that these 3 parishes would need to work together and develop some kind of strategic plan for carrying out the church's mission and ministry. Shortly thereafter, a pastor of a neighboring parish unexpectedly passed away. And so I received a second phone call from the bishop and said, we need you to become the administrator of a 3rd parish in addition to being pastor in Uxbridge, but we also want you to work with a 5th parish. And at that time, there was only one parameter given for this process. And the bishop told us, he said, you need to come up with a plan with the people for there to be 2 priests. So we were given 5 parishes with the expectation that at the end of the process, there'd be 2 priests. And that was it. From that point on, we could kind of explore and examine what might be best for the parishes and what might be best for the church and her mission.
So what did you do? So you were given the general parameters from the bishop. Mm-hmm. What did you then move to do to start forming committees, I'm sure, and putting the pieces in place, not just to walk this through for parishioners emotionally and spiritually, but also just logistically? What did you start planning from there?
Yeah, well, it began with prayer. And, when we talk about where did we come up with the idea of, or why did we call it parish renewal? I don't believe that closing and the merging of parishes is a signal of defeat. I think it's about regrouping and channeling the best resources that we have to be more effective in the ministry that we do in the name of Jesus Christ. And so I think the first thing for anyone who leads this kind of process is to make sure that that's just firmly rooted in their heart through prayer. So a lot of prayer takes place in the first phases of any kind of process like this. Then from there, what we decided to do was to assemble teams of representatives from each of the 5 parishes. So each parish put forward 5 representatives, and they began to meet with me and the other clergy on a biweekly basis. And we would meet for 3 hours at a time, and we did 3 things during that time. The first hour of every meeting was spent in Eucharistic adoration. The second piece of the meeting was a tour of the other parishes that were being considered. It was unbeknownst to me, the parishioners from these parishes, although they were in a small geographical area, they had no knowledge or interaction with the parishioners or the parishes in that area. So they needed to get to know those parishes a little bit. And then the third part of the meeting was each parish team would present their parish's background, and then what they saw as the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to their parish. So the first phase, which was the most intense of the phases, the longest of the phases, was really spent on prayer, listening, and just discerning the gifts and opportunities at each parish.
Hey there, sorry for this brief interruption, but we wanted to give you a quick heads up. If you're enjoying the Engaged Parish, head over to ecatholic.com/podcast and sign up for our newsletter. There you'll get updates on new episodes, behind the scenes content, and more. And of course, this show is brought to you by eCatholic, the engagement platform of the Catholic Church. Be sure to check us out at ecatholic.com. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and I don't think it can be overstated, the spiritual component of that. Could you talk about why you decided to start every meeting with an hour of adoration? I think that's important.
Yeah.
It's obvious, but
well, it is, except to say, I think it really grew out of the sense that the more I began to contemplate what would need to be done in this process, the more I began to realize just how inadequate I was. And so the really only possible way for this to be successful was to rely deeply on the power of the Holy Spirit. And so we placed ourselves before Jesus in the Eucharist. People have said, well, did you get insights, and did it come to you in these periods of prayer? And I honestly tell them those were the most awful prayer periods I've had because you're thinking of so many things, and there just didn't seem to be clarity on any of it. But the fact that I wasn't perceiving it clearly did not mean that the Holy Spirit wasn't working through those periods of prayer. And I really am firmly convinced that it was that time spent in prayer, our first hour spent in prayer, that actually led to making some really great decisions that has brought about really vibrant parish life in this area.
Yeah. And of course, everything else that you mentioned is important. But if there's one takeaway maybe from our time discussing this today, it's really consider, if parishes are going through this, beginning with that adoration, with that prayer. Just do it, even if it seems so dry.
Absolutely.
Could you talk us or bring us through, you mentioned the SWOT analysis. I think that's great. If folks aren't familiar, I definitely recommend just looking up SWOT, SWOT, and what that looks like. It's very simple and straightforward. But could you talk about, what that looked like and sort of how you digested that information? Were there particular indicators that you were looking for as you looked at those analyses?
Sure. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's called the Stockdale principle, based on Admiral Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war during the conflict in Vietnam. And when he was released from the prison camp, he said that 2 things were really important when you were a prisoner. He said, 1, you had to be very real about your current situation. You had to be honest with yourself about that. And then the second thing was that you couldn't give up hope of being released. And I think something similar had to happen in this process for parish renewal. So when we began looking at the SWOTs, we really had to be real with ourselves about our current situation. We looked at declining numbers of participation at Mass. the number of priests that were available, maintenance capital needs that were being either met or neglected. All of those things became really important for us, and we just had to be real about it. It wasn't about placing blame or saying that a parish had been neglectful or anything like that, but just to be real about our current situation. And when we began to look at strengths and opportunities, to really say, okay, well, where are these opportunities for us to hope, right? Where do we see a bright light that we want to capitalize and grow from? So that was kind of the process. I can't say it was like, oh, well, we just counted the number of people and said that's going to be the determining factor. This one has the fewest amount of people, and that one has the most amount of people. Therefore, it's a done deal. We really had to look for continuing opportunities for growth.
What did communication with the parishioners look like through that process?
Yeah, communication is actually one of the biggest keys that I tell to other pastors who are going through a process of renewal. It was really important for us because we had 5 separate parishes. It was important to us that everyone heard the same message consistently, which meant that we needed a vehicle in order to communicate that message to our parishioners. And thankfully, we established a website through eCatholic that we could post everything that we were doing as committees for parish renewal. We posted everything on this one landing page website. So you could go in there and you could review the same SWOT analyses that our committee members were reviewing. You could see the maps that we were looking at. You could see all of the demographics that we were considering. Periodically, I would post updates in parish bulletins and through Flocknote to the parishes, and then we would also post those on the website. The website became a very important tool for us for communicating consistently and accurately with parishioners, especially when it came time to announce the results of this work of pastoral planning and parish renewal. I knew that if I announced it at a Saturday vigil mass at 5 o'clock, the word was going to get out before I had a chance to speak to the people on Sunday morning on the Lord's Day masses. And so I said, we need a way in which everyone can see it at the same time and hear it at the same time. And so we recorded a video and posted it to the website. And then we told people on a certain time of the day, that's what would be posted on the website. And people could all go and hear me give the explanation for what was going to come for parish renewal.
And I believe that website is still live, and
Correct.
I believe also used, at least in the Diocese of Worcester, as an example of how to do it well. Brendan, if you could find that link, feel free to post it somewhere at the bottom of the screen. I believe it was renewmyparish.com or .org. Does that sound right,
yeah.
Father? .org.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Do you think that communication with parishioners throughout the entire process eased the final decision at the end of this journey?
Yeah, it was going to be hard for the decisions it was going to be hard for them no matter what. But they couldn't have said they didn't know about what was happening or anything like that. And so I think it was as open a process as we could have made it. And so, again, of the 3 keys that I have for parish renewal, that's one of the big ones.
Pastorally, I'm sure there are some emotions, there always is throughout this process. How did you deal with that? Any tips or tricks?
It is an emotion-packed experience. People have great love for their parishes. And I remember telling one person, I said, the fact that some people they're so emotional about it, it's a good sign. It means they love their parish deeply and they love their faith deeply. As a pastor, as someone who's involved in caring for them and their souls during a process like this, you feel their depth of pain and you accompany them through it. The thing for a pastor or a priest who leads parish renewal to always keep focused is they always have to keep focused on the greater vision. right? During a time of when you start talking about the potential of closing parishes or having fewer priests or whatever the case may be, it's very easy for parishioners to go down rabbit holes, right? They say, well, what about our parish fair? We've done that every year on the third Sunday of November, but they do theirs on the second Sunday of November. They want to go to those issues almost immediately. And like the leader of the process has to just keep his eyes very much focused on a vision of vibrant parish life that is possible through a parish renewal process. So in terms of listening to people and helping people deal with their emotions, you also want to be able to point them to a really vibrant vision for vital parish life. And there's something about that that's just innately exciting to imagine. We're not saying how we're going to get there yet, but just to imagine that there's, a parish that's packed with people every Sunday, right? Where you have, religious education classrooms where the faith is being taught authentically and in an engaging manner, where family life is being bolstered and families are engaging in prayer with one another and raising their families. Like that kind of stuff, when you start imagining like that's possible, it's just really exciting. So that really helps to deal with a lot of the emotions as well.
Yeah, and I want to come back to this subject, but before I do that, I don't want to jump the gun too much. Mm-hmm. So the SWOT analysis were completed. You were clearly continually bringing this to prayer. What did the end result look like for the parishes involved?
Sure. So we were dealing with 5 separate parishes, and in the end, based upon the recommendations of the teams of representatives from the parishes, not upon my analysis or anything like that, but upon the recommendation of the teams that were involved, St. Mary Parish in Uxbridge absorbed a parish nearby. So we united together under the banner of St. Mary Parish in Uxbridge. The 3 other parishes, they all united together and formed a brand new parish called Divine Mercy Parish.
And looking back now, so that was 2-3 years ago, mm-hmm. Would you say that the area has seen the fruits of those decisions?
For sure. And I can speak anecdotally about all the different ways in which this was a success. I can tell you, stories of people whose lives have benefited from this merger and how parish life has been bolstered by this experience of parish renewal. But I can also point to actual statistical information that we've been able to collect. So, while mass attendance is not the only indicator of healthy parish life, it is an indicator for healthy parish life. And so for years now, we've been taking pew counts every single Sunday, and we can show you the growth at both of these emerging parishes. Growth that is more than just the amalgamation of 3 communities of people coming together. It's not just the adding up of those 3 mass attendance numbers. It has exceeded that. We can point to growth in the financial contributions to the parish. We can point to the number of ministries that have emerged, and even at least at St. Mary's, where I can speak more directly to this particular aspect, we engaged our parishioners in a survey called the ME25 survey, the Member Engagement Survey, which was produced by the Gallup organization, which looks at key indicators that measures parishioners' level of engagement in the life of their parish. So beyond just attending Mass and giving money, what are those other questions that help to measure engagement of parish life? And we've seen even a healthy growth in the level of engagement of our parishioners following the parish renewal process.
That's excellent. When I remember this, so I haven't given this away yet, but Father Nick is my pastor. I attend St. Mary's in Uxbridge. But I do remember there were some very thoughtful gestures you did, just very practically speaking, with the parish that closed down nearby. Could you talk about what you did there?
Sure. Yeah. It's once a decision is made and then you begin moving towards some kind of merger or unification, there's a lot of things that have to be followed according to like the canon law of the church. So we, of course, made sure that we did all of those things properly and well. But for instance, at St. Mary's, with its unification with Good Shepherd Parish, the statue of the Good Shepherd, which was displayed prominently above the main altar at Good Shepherd Church, was brought to St. Mary's and placed in a prominent place at the entrance of the church. The parish center was renamed the Good Shepherd Center in order to preserve the name and the memory of that particular parish. The tabernacle from Good Shepherd Church was brought to St. Mary's. So those are some of the physical things, but even beyond that, we hosted open houses for parishioners to come to their new parish, right? So they didn't have to feel like they were coming into a place cold. They could come, they could explore all of the different properties, including the church, the rectory, the parish center, the school. They had a chance to tour all of it. They got to meet other parishioners. So it was just, one sense, it was about welcoming and hospitality on our end. And then we did also some things at Good Shepherd to help celebrate the wonderful contributions that parish made to the church over the years. They had a beautiful Cassavant organ at Good Shepherd Church, and we brought in just a wonderful organist who gave an organ concert. We had opportunities for things like that to celebrate the legacy and the contribution of Good Shepherd Church. The archivist, the historian of Good Shepherd Parish, did an amazing display of all the artifacts that have been collected over the 100-year or so history of Good Shepherd Parish. So those were just some of the things that we did to welcome parishioners. And I think all of that is good, but the most important piece was really helping the parishioners of St. Mary Parish to understand how difficult it would be for people to move from one parish to another, and that every single person in the parish, whether they were a greeter at the door or just attending Mass in the pews, that everyone had a role to play in extending welcome and hospitality to our brothers and sisters that were coming from another parish. So it became a parish effort of welcoming.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because of course it starts with the leadership, it starts with the priest, but it really is, it's two communities coming together. And so the parishioners and activating them really can't be overstated. Could you maybe talk, you just mentioned it, but talk a little bit more about how you activated St. Mary's parishioners? Obviously you had them think empathetically about what it would feel like for their parish to close, but talk about other ways that maybe even you reached out to key parishioners who you just know are a little bit more active in the community to welcome the new flock coming in.
Sure. A few things. One, I actually reached out to the parishioners from Good Shepherd whose parish was closing. They of course were sad that their church was closing, but they also fully embraced the idea of being part of a parish in order to be renewed and be part of a vibrant parish life. And I reached out to them and I asked them if they would come to St. Mary's and be like ministers of hospitality on the weekend in which the parishes were united, so that when parishioners from Good Shepherd arrived at St. Mary's, the person greeting them at the door was from Good Shepherd, welcoming them to St. Mary's, along with St. Mary's parishioners. So that they were phenomenal in that regard. But the other thing is, and I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast knows the dilemma of people in the pews who just feel that they own their seat, right? They've sat in that particular spot for the last 50 years. And come hell or high water, they will not move from that seat. I made light of it in a homily to them, but they got the point that some of this is going to require that all of us adapt and change. It's not merely just having more people come into the parish, but it also means that, maybe someone new is going to be sitting in your seat. And instead of being disgruntled toward that person, it's an opportunity to encounter that person, to meet that person. So I kind of leaned into recently I've decided to, instead of trying to combat the idea of you don't own your seat, I've decided to lean into it and say, you know what? Okay, so suppose you do own your seat, right? This is your seat. You've always sat there. Well, you all exist then as part of what we call pew neighborhoods. So you all exist in this pew neighborhood. Well, reach out to your neighbor in your pew neighborhood just to make contact, a word of welcome, a word of hospitality. And for those people for whom that is overwhelming, just to even the idea of just walking up to a complete stranger and introducing yourself, I asked parishioners to notice one another. You don't have to say anything necessarily, but look around. If you notice somebody new in your heart, offer your mass today for that new person that you just don't know. I said, more than just introducing ourselves, imagine if in Mass, you know that everyone at Mass is offering that Mass for somebody else in that church. It just helps to build community in a powerful way.
At the end of the day, do you feel like the Good Shepherd community and the other communities that merged together eventually form that cohesive bond?
Oh, sure. Yeah, without a doubt. It's helpful that, with at least when we speak of Good Shepherd and St. Mary's, all the parishioners, they knew each other already. The two churches were less than 2 miles apart, and they were all neighbors with one another. The reason there were two parishes to begin with was more about ethnic identity than anything. So the parishioners knew one another. And I think once the parishioners began to realize all that was possible when we came together, they just recognized what it was like to be in a parish that was supported by vibrant ministry, beautiful and reverent worship, all of those things that go into making vibrant parish life. Once people started to experience that and weren't worried about the struggle day in and day out of, can we keep this going? Can we not keep this going? All that stuff. I think everyone just really sort of rallied together. Let me just also add in that we also knew that not everyone from Good Shepherd would automatically come to St. Mary's, and that was okay. As a pastor, I was okay with the fact that not everyone was going to make that 1.5 mile journey from Good Shepherd to St. Mary's. We didn't want to see them leave the church. So we actually reached out to other parishes in the area. And of course, we're in New England, so there's churches everywhere. So we reached out to the other Catholic churches in the area and said, listen, would you be interested in hosting an open house for some parishioners from Good Shepherd who might not feel like comfortable at St. Mary's? Some of them were looking for smaller communities of faith and ended up at other parishes. And that was perfectly fine. We wanted to be able to accommodate people and where they felt that God was calling them to continue worship.
Earlier, you mentioned things like fall fairs and wanting to preserve some of that. I'm sure things even came up with unique ministries that some parishes have, especially as many parishes share resources. You mentioned in New England, there's so many parishes that it becomes a little bit easier to do that. How did you strike that balance of preserving some of the traditions and ministries from the parishes that ultimately closed down, while not necessarily saying yes to everything and overwhelming the schedule and what's going on at St. Mary's?
Sure, yeah. Years ago, I remember asking leaders of parish ministries to answer this particular question, which was, how does this make disciples? I just felt that, Jesus founded the church and gave it a very direct mission of going and making disciples. And so therefore, we in the church, everything we do has to be directed towards that aim of making disciples. And I wanted every ministry to be able to answer that with intentionality, right? You can say, you know what, we're just having the youth group for pizza and movie night. I have no problem with that. I think that's great. But I wanted the leaders to know, why do we do that, right? You need to be able to answer, how does that make disciples? And you can do that. You can say, well, doing something like that helps us to form greater bonds of relationship with young people, which then opens them to the possibility of sharing faith. So you can say that, but the key thing was about being intentional about it. So when it came time, when we began looking at merging the parishes, unifying the parishes, and considering the ministries, it gave us an opportunity to say which ministries are doing this intentionally and well, right? Their ministries aimed towards making disciples, um, and which ones that wasn't necessarily part of their purview. The ministries that wanted to embrace that, they continued on in their work at St. Mary's. And it also gave us permission to say, you know what, we don't want to continue certain things, not just from Good Shepherd, but also from St. Mary's. There were some things that we said, you know what, it's okay that we let this go, because we're going to direct our effort and our energy towards something new and something different. There are plenty of parishioners to give effort to all sorts of ministries. So we found that in the merger, the ministries of at Good Shepherd, they didn't detract from what was happening at St. Mary's, but just enhanced it.
Looking back, are there any, here comes a tough question, but looking back, are there any failures or things that you wish you had done better during this process?
Yeah, I think always, in hindsight, you have greater clarity and vision for things. One of the challenges. So I mentioned at the beginning that I was the administrator for 4 of the 5 parishes that were involved in this process of parish renewal. I was not the administrator of the 5th parish, and I think it would have been harder for me, but I think it would have been better if I had been part of that 5th parish as well, just in terms of communicating with them the vision for bright, vibrant parish life. I think sometimes because they didn't know who I was and they didn't have any relationship with me, there was some skepticism when it came time to actually deciding what was going to happen with parishes. So I think it would have been better if I had been more involved in the life of that parish as well. I'm not sure how it would have worked practically, but I think it would have been more effective for that parish. I think of the parishes, that one in particular struggled the most with what was decided.
Speaking to other priests, what did you do to make sure that your own spiritual, physical needs were taken care of during, I'm sure, what ended up being a very, very busy, emotional, strenuous couple of years?
Sure. Fortunately, during this period of parish renewal, the bishop had assigned 2 newly ordained priests to the parish. And so we lived together at St. Mary's, and we had wonderful fraternity among ourselves. And God bless them. They were newly ordained priests. So thank God they're still continuing on, because they came into a very difficult situation, and they did beautifully. They did a wonderful, wonderful job. And we enjoyed great priestly fraternity. Making sure that I was keeping my retreat each year and my prayer life healthy and strong. I was also fortunate to have great support from my bishop. He could not have been more supportive during this time. He knew how difficult it was, and he knew how hard it can be sometimes with so many personalities involved. But he continued to be just a great source of strength and support. And then I think in just having wonderful lay friends too, that you can just kind of, let off some steam every once in a while. But I'd say those were like the things that were just really important for my own sort of health and spiritual health and all these things. One of the other things too is that as the parishes together, we actually made a pilgrimage together to the Divine Mercy Shrine in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. So at every layer, we kept on wrapping this thing in prayer, and the more we wrapped it in prayer, the I don't say easier, but the more effective it was. I actually tell people, and people think I'm nuts, but I actually said, the time that I was doing this work of parish renewal was actually some of the most invigorating work of my priesthood over the last almost 15 years now. It was an amazing experience.
You also mentioned earlier this collective sigh that occurred. And we did touch on this earlier, but could you talk again about just, I can imagine dioceses and parishes wanting to continue to push this off because it is a difficult thing to tackle. But could you just really hammer home that collective sigh of relief when we no longer had to worry about whether or not this maintenance project was going to get done or what the financial situation was at such and such a parish? Just talk about the peace that now, and you mentioned this earlier, but the growth that's occurring in the area because the bishop and you all decided to tackle this.
Yeah. I've seen a number of dioceses in their approaches to parish renewal in their own dioceses, whether they do the one fell swoop, whether they do it more methodically and slowly, whatever the approach is, presenting a positive vision for parish life is exciting. It begins, I think, in the heart of the pastor who's leading this process, but it then gets shared with key leaders and then people within ministries, and then begins to infiltrate it down into the parishes, into the pews, and pretty soon everyone starts to experience that same excitement. I guess there's no easy way around it. It takes hard work. I mean, it's never an easy process, and I'm sure there are still people that it will take some time for their wounds to heal. But to see vibrant parish life emerge through a process as difficult as this is it's just really encouraging. It's and some people like to there's another thing that we began to realize during this process, and I'm not sure if this directly corresponds to this question, but it just struck me. One of the concerns early on is that when we entrusted this task to parish representatives, these teams, again, I didn't make these decisions. These representatives made their proposals to the bishop, who made the decision ultimately. But one of the things that we began to worry about is whether or not parishioners would be so attached to the physical property of the church, which is important. I'm not saying that it's not, but they would be willing to risk, say, the health of their priests and the health of their professional staffs at the parishes. And what we began to realize is that as devoted to the physical properties as these parishioners were, they loved their churches, they loved their parishes and what they remember of their parishes. They loved them deeply, but they also they began to realize that for the good of the priest, for the good of the parish, it was okay to let that go because we could see something else, that we began to see what was possible. And again, I'm not, whether we describe it as a sigh of relief or or an excitement that begins to emerge. I mean, in some sense, the excitement is more exhausting, right? Because now you've got this work to do, but you're encouraged to do it. You're excited to do it. But it was an interesting shift, I think, for me to realize that people really were concerned about the health of their priest and the health of those who were doing ministry. So
it's a good point. I never really thought of it from that angle, but you're absolutely right. Those things must factor in to part of this decision making. Mm. And it's a good reflection point as well for the parishioners as they think through, maybe letting go of some of that attachment. It always is difficult, as you mentioned. So as we begin to wrap up, are there any other areas of this process that you'd like to highlight or other tips that you would give parishes, dioceses, priests that are looking to take this on?
Sure. Yeah. I've gone to, I visited St. Joseph Seminary in Dunwoody each year for the last few years. I'll be going again this year to speak with their fourth-year seminarians who are just about to be ordained priests, because they recognize in seminary formation that most priests are going to be placed, at least in the Northeast, will be placed into scenarios in which some kind of parish renewal work will need to take place. So I go there and I speak with them about this process and what happened in Uxbridge and in the Blackstone Valley. And I've laid out for them, kind of some key takeaways. And I have more than this, but I want to focus on three that I think for anyone listening are just really helpful for this kind of work. And we touched upon all of them, but I just want to put them in kind of the forefront. The first is the primacy of prayer. I can't emphasize enough the importance of prayer in a process like this, not only for a priest's personal well-being, but also for the success of the process, that it's got to be first and foremost the work of the Holy Spirit. And so while it may be tempting to skip over that piece, prayer must be of the utmost importance. Again, when we met, we would meet every other week for 3 hours, and the first hour was spent in prayer, which meant that a third of our time was devoted to prayer. The second is that you must communicate well, right? And if that's not your particular strength, then find someone whose strength is communication, and communicate consistently across all forums, so that the same message is shared among all the people. The worst thing that you could do is tell one parish one thing and tell the other parish the other thing. It just needs to be consistently clear among all parishes and people involved. So prayer first, communication second, and then the third is having a clarity of vision. That starts in the heart of the pastor who's leading parish renewal, but has to be cast to the other leaders in the parish, and that all involved, and then all the people in the parish, so that there's a unity of vision, of something that is exciting and hopeful and bright for your parish. And as a leader of this process, you have to continually go back to that vision, remind people of that vision over and over and over again. It will become exhausting at some point to have to keep on reminding people of the vision, but because there are emotions involved and there's just a lot of work involved in processes of parish renewal, the leader really needs to show the vision and it's the encouraging nature of positive vision for the church.
Yeah, thank you. That summary, I think, is perfect. And maybe a good note to end on, but is there any other area of this that you would want to explore before we wrap up the show today?
Oh, I think we've covered most of it. I think, the creativity of it is good. I'm sure there are others who will have done it similarly or have done it differently and have also had good success. But as I said, I don't think we as a church need to be afraid of these processes of parish renewal. It's not retreating. We're regrouping. We're actually coming out. We're actually becoming stronger through processes of parish renewal.
Sorry, I just need to ask because I find that very interesting. There are shifting demographics, things we can't expect that the way that parishioners are going to act is going to be the same as 50, 100 years ago. Could you talk a little bit, at least in the New England area, of what you've noticed? What you've noticed with those trends that lends itself well to this type of renewal and the growth that can be replicated in other areas that we've seen in the Blackstone area.
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Sorry.
That again? Yeah.
Sure. So just we've talked about some of the demographic shifts. Decades ago, people were very used to going to let's say their ethnic parish, or they did not want to drive, or they couldn't drive miles to get to their Catholic church. Could you just maybe speak to some of, maybe they're obvious, but some of those shifts that lends itself well to this sort of renewal activity?
Sure. Yeah. We have a great opportunity, and I want to say the harvest is ripe for the picking. There is, I'm forgetting his name, but he wrote an interesting book. He's a Monsignor in the church, president of a university in one of the Dakotas. But anyway, he wrote an interesting book, and it's something like from Christendom to Apostolic Times or something like that. And the premise of the book is that we no longer live in an age of Christendom in which Catholic Christian principles and ideals are valued by society. And while we certainly lament that, I think, he looks at it and he also sees that it just means that there are so many opportunities. And he said, the time that we live, his premise is that the time in which we live now is more like the time of the apostles than any other time since the apostles. But that also means that there's a harvest that is like ripe for the picking. And so our opportunity as a church to present the gospel, to present the love of Jesus Christ and the salvation that Christ offers to his people, all of that, it's like the world needs that. And it also means that we then can be creative in how we address that. We're no longer set or bound by, say, an older way of doing parish life. We're actually given license now to be a little bit more creative and bold in how we approach parish life and parish renewal. For some people, they're going to hear that and that's exhausting to them. It's almost like overwhelming to them. I hear that and I'm just totally excited because it means that we can be more creative, right? We're no longer bound by an older sense of what it meant to be a parish. We're actually creating a new sense of what it means to be a parish and how we address the mission of the church. So I think that's really exciting. I think it gives us sky's the limit in terms of how we approach evangelization. It's lamentable that we don't live in Christendom anymore, but the opportunities of being in apostolic times are immense, and so we've really got to capitalize on that.
Sure. And it seems like, again, just practically speaking, resources, whether they be financial or even just human capital, can in some ways be multiplied when, there's maybe not necessarily two parishes right across the street from each other, but if you can group that into one, again, not trying to belittle the difficulty of taking that on, but it just seems like the resources and the impact can be multiplied when we come together.
Yeah, and it has to be, right? Because if you think about a time in, say, the 1950s or so in parish life, people were coming to church whether or not the priest was going out and getting them, right? People were knocking on the door, so much so that sometimes they were kept out, right? And it's not like that anymore. We actually have to go out and to bring people in. We have to be more aggressive in our evangelization efforts in order to bring people into the church. And in order to do that, we have to reevaluate and assess where are we using our resources, talents, and things like that, because it's not just people, they're not just going to show up because that's what they have always done. We actually have to go out and make the case for Christ.
Well, thank you, Father. Once again, I want to leave our listeners with renewmyparish.org. We'll also include that in the show notes. Brandon just put that up on the screen as well for those that are watching. Renewmyparish.org. That is the website you all used to keep all the parishes on the same page. So you're not, as you pointed out earlier, not telling one parish one thing, another the other. Or, things are making its way through the chain of just people talking. Renewmyparish.org. Go there to see what Father Nick and also the committees involved with this parish renewal put together. And then just obviously a shameless plug for eCatholic. Obviously, we provide a lot of different communication tools, including websites and also Connect, which is our email and text message group messaging tool. So we have a lot of the tools needed. We've worked obviously with St. Mary's in Uxbridge and many other parishes that have gone through this renewal merging effort. And so we are always happy to speak with you about communication and technology needs as you might be taking this process on. So once again, thank you, Father Nick, for joining us today. This was extremely fruitful. I really enjoyed having this conversation. I know this is going to help many, many parishes. So thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. God bless, Father.
You too.